My name is Brent Sellers. I'm the Extension Weed Specialist here at the Range Cattle Research and Education Center. I'm also serving as a Center Director. And it's my privilege today to talk about broomsedge management in bahiagrass pastures. And this is a study that really started back in 2012. And we've continued that study since then and actually added a couple studies. So my purpose today is to really talk about those two long-term experiments. For some background information, so for those of you that don't know broomsedge or these broomsedge species, which are really blue stems, they are tufted perennials, which means they form clumps. They are thought to survive anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And unfortunately, when I first started this project, I thought it would be pretty simple. Thought there was maybe 5 species of broomsedge or blue stems in the state, but I quickly found out there's closer to 18, and now one of the most recent references suggests there's 19 species or subspecies of blue stems in the state. And it's pretty easy to see these right now because they flowered late fall, and there's still a lot of standing stems out in pastures unless they've been mowed. So it's pretty easy to see those out in the pastures. So broomsedge is kind of a misnomer, if you will, because it's kind of confusing because we have nutsedge, which is the plant over here on the right, versus bushy blue stem or bushy broomsedge on the left. So being that it has sedge in the name, it leads a lot of people to think that it is actually a sedge when in fact it is a grass. So that has led to some confusion in the past where people want to spray outrider, which we use for nutsedge or watergrass control in pastures, and then they get disappointed when it doesn't control the broomsedge. And it's because the broomsedge is not a sedge. So it is an actual grass. It's just the way it was named. But these are, botanically called, or more correctly called, blue stems. So you'll see that as we go through the presentation today. So when I first started this research, I was looking at some of the literature from, several years ago now. So what they found in Southwest Missouri was that broomsedge disappeared from plots that were fertilized with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium over a 5-year period. A different study that looked at tillage at 3-inch depth, so very shallow tillage, with 100 pounds the acre of N, also decreased broomsedge density in Bermuda grass pastures. Overall, if you look at all the research that's been done on the species complex, what you'll find is that most of the research is indicating that these infestations are the result of low fertility, and most, if not all, of the extension publications that you might see, not so much today, but in years past, many times they will implicate soil pH. And that's where we have ran into some issues with the species over time. So when we first started looking at the blue stems of the broomsedge species in the state, really started to get our minds wrapped around what we had. We quickly found out that soil pH may or not be the reason. So if we look at this table real quick, and I can't get my mouse to work very well. It's still not going to. So if we look at these different locations, Hardy, Polk, 3 Polk County locations, Okeechobee County, Highlands, Manatee, Ona, Glades, and DeSoto. Well, Ona is not a county, obviously, it's here at the center. But these different locations where we had different species of broomsedge, we also had different soil pH levels. So if I use our research center as an example, at Ona, we had a pH of 4.3. Our species at the center where we pulled those soil samples was purple blue stem. If we go down to DeSoto, where the pH was 7.8, that species was completely different. It was bushy bluestem. And then if you go to the other Hardy County location, the pH of 5.9, that was broomsedge bluestem. So different species appear to have different tolerances for different levels of soil pH. So pH may not necessarily be the reason. But for some species like purple bluestem, it does have an impact on growth. So this was a greenhouse experiment that was conducted by a high school student for a science fair project a number of years ago. And we did this in the greenhouse where we amended the soil so we could raise the pH of that soil from 4.5 to 5.5 and also to 6.5. And then we transplanted purple bluestem seedlings into these pots and measured growth for a period of 9 weeks. And it should be pretty clear where we had the native soil of 4.5, where those plants are taller. Increasing the soil pH to at least 5.5 decreased the height of the broom sedge by about 30% on average. So pH, yes, in this specific case, did have an impact on purple bluestem height. So if we go back to the table I showed a couple slides ago that shows the different pH values at different locations, there's one specific line in that table I wanted to point out, and that's the Polk County location with the 2 asterisks next to it. The pH in that site was 6.0, and it had a couple different species of bluestems or broomsedge out there in that pasture. But what that specific grower had told me was that the broomsedge population in that pasture had declined over about a 3-year period. And they had been applying biosolids onto those pastures. And what was interesting was when you looked across all of those sites that we sampled soil from, it was the only site that had very high levels of phosphorus, which corresponds to previous research, but also had some significant levels of copper. And from another location that's not included here, where some other residuals have been applied that had a significant source of copper, they were seeing declines in broom sedge at that location. So the question is, does phosphorus really have a role in Florida, like we're seeing in other states? Is it copper, or is it something else? Is there some other macronutrient or micronutrient that might be impacting our broom sedge populations? So we started a first experiment, and based on the study that was conducted in Missouri, we decided we'd make this at least a 5-year study. We started these at Ona here at the center in Arcadia, both in 2012 and another one in 2013 in St. Cloud. And depending on location and depending on the initial soil pH, it either received lime or did not receive lime. And then it received annual applications of 50 pounds of N to the acre, 25 pounds of P, and 50 pounds of potassium to the acre. And that was with or without micronutrients. So we had basically a 3-way factorial, if you will, in these studies. And we conducted broom sedge counts annually and also pulled soil and tissue samples in the fall. So just wanted to show you some of the initial parameters that we're dealing with at each of those locations. Arcadia with bushy bluestem was the species there. Initial soil pH was 7.7 and some reasonable nutrient levels. At Ona, the pH was 4.3, and that species was purple bluestem, and pretty low fertility overall at that site. In St. Cloud, the pH was 5.5, so right on target for bahiagrass, and that was predominantly broomsedge bluestem. There was a couple other bluestem species out there as well, but broomsedge bluestem was the predominant species there. So again, this is just to show the plot layout, how this was laid out. And I just wanted to reiterate that in Ona, we applied lime beginning in 2012 before any other nutrient applications were applied. And then after soil testing, again in 2018. In Arcadia, because the pH was so high, we did not apply lime there at all. We were actually applying elements for sulfur at 100 pounds per acre annually, along with the macro and micronutrients. And then at St. Cloud, we applied no lime whatsoever. It was just looking at the macro and micronutrients. So just quickly, just some of the results from Arcadia. We did see a pretty rapid response from the annual NP&K applications as early as 1 year after a treatment. So we have in this chart bushy bluestem density on the y-axis and the years on the x. And with NP&K it's in the orange bars, and without NP&K is in the blue bars. And if it has different letters within the same years, that means they're statistically different. So every year, except 2017, we did see a significant difference in the number of broom sedge plants or bushy bluestem plants in NP&K treated plots. So as much as a 50% decrease in some years. So why is there so much variability from year to year? And a lot of it, I believe, has to do with mowing and just the regeneration of plants from seedling, and they may not make it to a mature stage. So I think that's what's going on with the variation. You'll see that again when we get to the other locations. But it's interesting that we've seen no response from annual applications of sulfur, nor the micronutrients. Okay, at Ona, it was a little bit different. We saw, and again, this is a different species. This is purple bluestem. The chart is set up exactly the same way, except now we had a lime response. So liming the pasture that was infested with purple bluestem, by 3 years after the lime application, we started to see a significant difference in the number of broom sedge plots, or number of broom sedge plants and plots that were treated with lime versus no lime. And again, initially it's about 45 to 50% decline. As the years progressed, it was near 90% decline. But then we get to 2020 and the population obviously crashed from 2019 to 2020 overall, which again, if they live 3 to 5 years, we would expect that. So from 2015 to 2019, we ought to see an increase over time, but then if that population crashed, it would decrease dramatically. So liming purple bluestem had a significant impact, but we saw no response from NP or K applications nor micronutrients. So again, this site, like the site in Arcadia, was mowed annually right before or right after flowering of the plants. At St. Cloud, we saw no response from NP&K or micro, so I'm not even showing data from that location. And what's interesting there is it was mowed from time to time, but it was not mowed annually like these other two sites. Okay, so by 2016, we kind of felt like we're starting to get an idea that it's either lime that's affecting, at least the purple bluestem, that's affecting broom sedge populations, or in the case of bushy bluestem, it's NP&K. So can we kind of tease out whether it's the NP or K that might be impacting the broom sedge populations? So in 2017, we started a new study, and we applied lime as needed per soil test recommendations. And then we looked at different combinations of N by itself at 15 pounds per acre, phosphorus by itself at 25 pounds per acre, and potassium alone at 50 pounds per acre, and then with and without each other. So if we look at the bottom line in the table on the right where it says rep 4, so you see N, P, and K by itself, then we had N plus P, N plus K, P plus K, N plus P plus K, and then no amendments at all. So we're able to look at this and really try to figure out if N, P, and K is having an impact, which macronutrient is it N, P, or K that is really affecting the broom sedge populations, if any of them, right? Because we saw with purple blue stem that N, P, and K, at least at that site, was not having an influence. It was more of lime. So we conducted this just outside of the research center and then at Buck Island. So at Buck Island, what we found was a response from potassium. Very surprising to me. This actually is pretty shocking. So, but it took 2 years to see that response. So about a 30% decline in 2019 after 2 annual applications, and then almost a 65 to 70% decline by 2020 from potassium alone. This site has been mowed a couple of times, but not annually at this point. So we are seeing a response from potassium, but no response from phosphorus and no response from nitrogen alone. So when I was looking at this data, I was like, well, I don't know if this is really going to be real or not, because that was one site, but let's look and see what happened at Ona. And that's exactly what we saw. Same thing at Buck Island. It just looks a little bit different, and I'm going to explain that in a second. So initially, a year after the first application, no response from anything, but by 2019 and 2020, we were seeing at least a 50% reduction in broom sedge populations from potassium. But again, like Buck Island, no response from P and no response from N. So what's different between Buck Island and Ona is that I tried to remove smut grass from the study site at Ona. And to do that, we use Velpar hexazinone and at the full rate of 2 quarts per acre. And lo and behold, for whatever reason, the stars and the moon aligned, and we knocked out a lot of the broom sedge plants at that location. That's something you would never have if you really wanted to control the broom sedge, right? So we were looking at very low populations initially then after we sprayed the hexazinone, and that's why the populations are so low in 2018. But overall, the populations are increasing, but much less so where the potassium has been applied. All right, so, doing research often leads to more questions. So one of the things that's really been bothering me since 2016 is why are we not seeing any impact from anything at the St. Cloud location? So why could that be? And the only thing I have come up with to date is the fact that I know the 2 sites here have been mowed, or here at Ona and the one in Arcadia has been mowed almost every year since we started the study. And that has not occurred at St. Cloud. So that could be one reason, or it could be that the species there is just not responding to NP&K applications or micros. Another question is, why is phosphorus having an impact on broom sedge species in other states, but not here? And I think it just has to do with the phosphorus levels in the subsoil that we have in the state. And the bahiagrass is able to mine that, but doesn't have a lot of residual potassium. So by adding potassium, we're making the bahiagrass maybe a little bit more competitive. And that's why we're seeing a response from the potassium and not the phosphorus. So liming. A lot of people will say, well, I have a lot of broom sedge, I'm going to go out and apply lime. Well, that's not something you just need to do blindly. I think soil testing is a must, something that we need to do and not just do that blindly because of the species that you might have in the pasture. And I think another thing we need to focus on is, this study has looked at micro and macronutrients and liming, And yeah, fertility is part of the equation, but I think there's more to it. Defoliation, either through grazing or mowing, I think is something that needs to be included. We could look at the possibility of tillage, but that's not been proven at this point in Florida. But then also we got to incorporate herbicides with either spot treatment or wiping, because the only herbicide we have that's going to kill broom sedge at this point in time on a consistent basis is going to be glyphosate. So I wanted to touch on that real briefly, using glyphosate in the wiper, because this is something that we have done here at the center and have been fairly successful. So usually we're using a 10% volume to volume solution, and we are wiping in 2 directions. And I always say when I'm talking about wiper and presentations that this is more of an art than it is a science when we're using the wiper for applications, because it does take some experience. And the more experience you have, a lot of times the lower concentration of glyphosate you can use. And that's what we have seen over time. And one of the things that has helped, at least us here at the center, is to put some foaming solution in with the tank, which makes the roller actually foamy, so you can actually see how much of the solution is on the wiper. So I just wanted to show a couple shots from the trial that we did here a few years ago. And this has been in the Cattleman's magazine before, so if you want to see these pictures again, they're actually in the current issue of the Cattleman's magazine. So this is after treatment, about a month after we wiped broom sedge with a 10% solution in 2 directions. And unfortunately, with this area, they were going to use this for a grazing trial, and it got mowed pretty shortly. Actually, this picture came from 2 weeks after application, and it got mowed just after I took these pictures. So I did not think this was going to work very well. But another reason I didn't think it was going to work very well is because we were wiping the flowering stems and not so much leaf material. But this, coupled with mowing, and then followed this by a second application the following August, we did see a significant decline, upwards of 90% control in that pasture from 2 annual wiping events. And this is that same pasture 2.5 years after the initial wiping. So it does have a fit, and I think using the wiper along with the right fertility levels, that we can start to make some headway with broom sedge populations. So just to summarize, if in some aspects increasing soil fertility will help, but it's going to take time. Since broom sedge species live anywhere from 3 to 5 years, it's going to take probably 3 to 5 years to see much of a response if you're just looking at fertility alone. If you're going to go after a more integrated approach, it may not take that long. And I do believe that wiping or spot treating is something that we need to look at, but we still have more work to do. So, we know about tillage from the literature and Bermuda grass that has an effect as long as there's some fertility included in that. So what about chopping, roller chopping, aerating, followed by fertilization? Is that something that can help us? What about multiple mowing cycles? I think a lot of us have seen evidence where roadsides or high traffic areas that have been mowed, consistently throughout the growing season, that the broom sedge population isn't there. But yet beyond that mowing point, then you start seeing a lot more broom sedge. And what about increased grazing pressure? Can we increase our grazing pressure, increase defoliation, and along with fertility treatments, and then decrease our broom sedge populations? So that concludes what I wanted to share with you today. If you do have questions, please feel free to send me an email if you have questions about this presentation or anything else that I have covered in the past. And with that, I will take any questions if there are any.
The first question is, what time of year to mow if using multiple mowing cycles as a method of control?
That is a really good question. And I think if you're looking from the prevention standpoint, at least from preventing seed production, the timing would be to do it right before they're getting ready to flower. And that can be difficult to time depending on the species, because some of them do start flowering a little bit earlier than others. I think there's two things that will help. One is, right before flowering, but if you miss that opportunity, and then we get into more of the drier season and they have grazed most of the other species, pretty significantly, maybe that's the time you go in and mow those old stems off. And then you'll get a little bit of regrowth from those broom sedge clumps, which should entice, the cattle to start grazing those clumps because it's new growth. So that would be, something to think about. I don't know that anybody has the information as far as, how many mowing cycles it takes to completely take out a clump forming grass like broom sedge. There's data from out west that does show that repeated clipping on some of the clump forming grasses out there does decrease the longevity of those plants. But for broom sedge species, we just don't know yet.
Okay. Next question, does broom sedge produce allopathic chemicals that prevent other plants from germinating?
So the question on allelopathy, I think there's some evidence out there that does suggest that it is allelopathic, but we have not conducted that here in Florida on the species that are desirable to us. So I think the potential is there. I'll put it that way. And I think a lot of times what we're dealing with is not so much allelopathy, but just the presence of the plant shading out bahiagrass, and the fact that when it's flowering, the cattle will not graze it and they won't graze around it very well. So I think that's where we're running into the most issues.
All right, next question. What time of year for glyphosate wiper applications?
It's another good question. So I think anytime you can get the wiper across the pasture and target the broom sedge in the most effectively. So dry season, when the broom sedge is still actively growing, but the cattle have grazed bahiagrass pretty close to the ground, and you have good height differential, that is a good time. And then right before flowering, I mean, it's kind of like mowing. If we can get the wiper across there right before flowering and limit that seed production, because it's going to stop those flowering stems in its tracks almost. And we've shown that we can get good coverage with that, and we're getting good activity with that approach.
Okay, the next question, I'm a little unsure as to what's being asked, but it reads, have heard old timers say chopping or aerating when wet.
Okay, so I think that's something that has been observed, and I've also heard the same thing for smut grass. Chopping smut grass when it's wet will also get rid of that. And I have been in pastures where that's been done, and it's very temporary. It's like mowing, as far as I'm concerned. So I think you can go, and I've seen this actually just down the road from the center where they have chopped, and I was like, looks pretty good the year after. So just kept watching that pasture, and slowly, well, I shouldn't say slowly, by year 3, it was almost back to where it was initially. Now, granted, it wasn't wet, but it was wet enough. So I think it's a temporary fix. And again, I think it can be incorporated into a multi-pronged approach to attack the broom sedge.
Okay, would you like to give a last word, Dr. Sellers, before I share some announcements?
Sure. The only thing I'll say is if you do have more questions, just feel free to shoot me an email or call me, and we'll get your questions answered. Thank you.
All right, everybody. So I just wanted to let you guys know about the upcoming webinars that we've got. On February the 9th, we're going to have a guest presenter with the UF Animal Sciences Department, Dr. Todd Thrift. He's going to be speaking about cull cow considerations. And then in March, on the 9th, Dr. Joe Vendramini is going to be presenting use of monosin, I'm sorry, I'm butchering that word, in beef cattle supplementation. And both of those events you can register for through our online calendar from our website. And also, you guys that are joining us today, once this presentation recording is available, I will be sending you that in an email, and I'll include the link to register for our next events. The next event that I'd like to mention is our Bluebird program. It's an educational series being put on by Dr. Hans Ellington and his technician, Bethany White. And it's going to be happening at this point once a month this year through June. So the next date, I believe, is February the 27th, and it's on a Saturday. It's a virtual program, and you can register likewise through our online calendar. The Alvin C. Warnick Beef Cattle Reproductive Management online video series is a free series that is online. All these videos are on YouTube, and they're accessible from the link shown here from the South Florida Beef Forage website. And check those out. This is a free program. No cost to you, these wonderful educational videos. Next week, don't miss the Florida Cattlemen's Institute and Allied Trade Show, which this year will be a virtual program. Registration is free. Sponsorships are also available. So check that out on Eventbrite. And then here's our information. So if you have any questions or anything like that, please reach out to us at the email shown here at the bottom of this slide. Also, be sure to follow us on social media to keep up with what's happening and news that you might enjoy or programs you might find beneficial. And I hope you have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you in February.